So America is naturally and inherently a non-communist country. You have this mayor coming in and he's a outright outspoken communist. His mission is to destroy the American way of life. Now, who's working with him and who's he working for? We don't know just yet. There is some rumblings that he has some big backers that have been trying to destroy this country for a long time. So it's possible that he's working with them or they're, funding him to try and further the agenda because they want to see the same thing happen. Regardless, he's still doing this, even if he's just acting on his own accord. And now that he's won, um, he's going to do damage to New York City. He's going to make some progress. He's definitely going to be held up in certain regards because he does need the Governor Hochul to approve certain things since she has dominion over the city from the state level. And you do have other layers of government that and the judicial system that will be able to stop some of his agenda. But he doesn't seem like a stupid person, and whoever he's working with that's advising him probably isn't stupid either. They are going to find ways to do certain things. We're going to double the code violation penalty. What that means is the city is a municipality and they basically have a code, not really of ethics, but like their own rules for operating within the confines of the city. And essentially, he's talking about the building codes. It's upkeep for the building. All the landlords throughout the city are required to follow the same code. Every city has a code, every major city at least, but every city probably does by this point. And everybody's required to, keep things a certain way so that it's maintained well enough to where it's not an endangerment to anybody. You reduce the liability risks that are out there as much as possible, and so many other factors. Because a lot of this just evolved over time with so many things going wrong with people not maintaining things. So the codes themselves are not bad. A lot of them are in place to actually help people. Like you have fire life safety codes. These codes are to protect people from the landlord not taking care of the building and then the building burning down and killing everybody inside of it. Well, we wouldn't want that. We also wouldn't want a building that was not structurally built the right way. So, one day it just falls down and kills everybody because, it failed, right? We don't want that. So we do need a code. We do need a set of rules where the government inspectors get involved and they make sure that things are being kept well and everybody's following the rules to protect everybody involved. So they give violations, which is basically they charge you essentially a tax. It's a fee that you owe if you don't stick to the plan. If they tell you you have, a code violation, you need to correct it. It could be anything. It could be expired fire extinguishers. It could be your building needs some sort of major structural engineering to fix something with the foundation or with the bricks, the masonry. So you would have to get that work done in order to be compliant. And then if you don't get it done, you get another fee on top of that. And a lot of times the fees just keep adding up until you owe a lot of money. And if you don't get it fixed, they put a lien against your building and you cannot sell the building until the lien is paid. So even if you do sell the building, they take a portion of your profits and they pay the, fines back. And then whatever the difference is, you get to keep his profit. So that's how it's always been done. What he's saying is we're going to change it. We're going to double the fees, which already is very high because New York's a very expensive city and the fees are already very high. And then we're going to, if you don't get it done by a certain deadline and pay the fee, we're going to come in and do the work ourselves, which has never been done before. The city has never gone into a building and got the work done and then sent the bill to the landlords. That is unheard of. I don't think it's ever been done in any city in America up until this point. I mean, it may be an isolated incidents where they had no choice because the building, was condemned or something and the landlord still owned it, but it was such a big hazard that they had no choice. I don't know. I've never heard of any cases like that, and maybe I'm wrong, but on a general basis, that's never been done before. Just that alone is already something new. And they would just typically keep fining you until you racked up a ton of fines. And then just like parking tickets and speeding tickets, right? You ever see people who pop open their glove compartment and they had a bunch of tickets pop out because they just weren't paying them? You just keep getting them. They don't go away. They stay at your property, against your property on the record until they're paid. And so that's how it's always been done. And eventually the landlords, would want to sell for some reason and they knew that they had to pay that fine. And the government knew eventually they would get that money because at some point when the landlord did sell, they would see it then because you can't go through with that transaction until the fines are paid. But this is a totally new thing that the mayor was actually come in, have a company do the work, and then bill you for it, which also is another problem because typically how it works is landlords and companies that are involved in this type of business, they will get multiple bids from different contractors and go with typically, not always, but a lot of times the lowest bidder. So they have a chance to save money on the job. The government's not going to do that because they don't have that type of time and manpower to be able to shop around a bunch of bids and find the best one and analyze them and make sure that they're all the same and you're actually getting the lowest price for the correct job and so many other factors that fall into place with that. They're not going to do that. They're going to go with whoever is a government contractor and has these type of government affiliations. They're going to go with their people, and their people are probably going to charge a ton of money because people do this all the time to the government. I mean, the military was notorious for this. They would, a screw would cost $10,000, and they would pay it because they wanted to pretend that they were getting the best thing ever by putting a high ticket number on it or some backdoor fraud, whatever. The government would just have one of their affiliates do the job at whatever the highest price was because they don't care. It's not their money. And they would bill the landlord back when the landlord could probably have gotten that job done for half or a quarter of what the government's contractor would charge. And this happens often in that regard. Not to mention the government's probably going to use union people. A lot of times landlords will use non-union people because they can't afford the union people and they'll skirt around it because they just don't want to deal with the unions anyway. So that adds to it. You're going to end up paying a lot more money for a union government contractor to come in and fix that thing. And it will cost you probably 2 to 3 times at bare minimum what it would cost to just do the job on your own as a landlord. Then on top of that, if you're still not getting it done, which again is already well beyond that they did the work and then charged you back for it, or just build you directly or whatever. So now you owe all these fines and you owe the money for the job, whatever the project was. If you don't pay that at a certain deadline, they're going to now take your building from you. Now that is unheard of, and I don't think that's ever been done in American history. Again, isolated incidents. If your building is condemned or it's a slum house and they did it through the courts because you were committing crimes on the property, that's a different situation. But if you are just running a building, you're the landlord, you own it, and it's not up to code by what the government says. Because also, too, they just make up these codes. Some of them are BS, some of them are legitimate, and they actually are good for the city and the people. And they could just make up random codes and say, you're not adhering to the code. We're gonna, fine you, and if you don't pay it, we're gonna, do all kinds of stuff. And then if you still don't play ball, we're going to take your building from you. That is unheard of and that's ridiculous. But there's actually a couple different ways they can do it. Now, technically, they can't because you have the right to own property in America and nobody can take that from you. In fact, you have the right to outright own property and not pay any property tax and not have you can't have any loans against it. You would have to own it outright cash. You have the right to have a grant deed instead of a warranty deed where you own it and there's nobody that can take it from you and you can't even sell it. You would have to grant it to someone else. But people don't do that today, especially in the cities, especially New York City. They all follow the modern way of doing things where they get mortgages on the property, they have a warranty deed, they don't even hold the deed until they pay down the mortgage and they end up, owning it outright. And then they still pay property tax indefinitely forever to the government, even though it's their property. So the city operates differently than a lot of the rest of the country. And it's very hard to fight that system because it's been in place so long. And Americans have just kind of been going and playing ball, even though they really shouldn't be. And they should be banding together and standing against this corrupt system. Nobody does anything about it. There is a couple different ways. Now, one way I'm definitely familiar with. The other ways I'm not as familiar with, but I understand that this is something that he can do, and he would have to invoke it, and he would have to follow through with it, and adhere to a certain plan, but could maybe get it done. The first way is something called eminent domain. This is when the government can take your property, technically by force, but it's because there is a bigger, greater cause for the community or for the state or for the township or whatever as a whole. It's going to benefit people on a mass scale. And it's designed and set up so that the people can't be selfish and say, take claim to something all for themselves when we all have to share this country. So it actually is a good thing. It would be like if one person's house is in the middle of a field and it's the only way the highway could get built is to cut through that field and go right on top of their house with the highway. But it's going to allow, millions of people to travel every day to wherever they have to go way quicker than taking all the back roads. It's going to open up all types of growth and innovation for the country. So you could do this too. You could look at this statistically um, and see throughout time different maps. Civilizations always grow wherever there's naturally occurring water and wherever there's highways. Ever those two things exist, you will see populations spread like a wildfire. It takes time, it could be 100-year time lapse, but they always grow around those areas. So it does help growth, it does help innovation, it does help, populate areas. If there's a town that really, maybe has like a population of 250 people and it's not making any money and everybody's poor, if you set up a highway that, lets people off there, put up a gas station there, people start building businesses around it, and then eventually your town is thriving and it's making money and it's providing people with a way of life, providing them with, an income to feed their families and live a decent life, have the American dream. So eminent domain is a good thing to a certain degree when the government doesn't abuse it. But it's for things like that. But it's also for other projects that better the community overall. It's not just for highways. They can take it and build a neighborhood of low income housing and say this is going to better the community because there is a lot of poor and homeless people in this area and they can't afford the cost of living. So this is going to give them the ability to have a home so that they're not homeless and being a burden to the society. The community wants this in mass versus the few people who don't. So they have multiple ways of, invoking eminent domain if they choose to. They could do like I just said. They could take your building and say, well, we need this anyway because we're going to, make it low income housing and give people a place to live so that that's affordable and stuff like that. When eminent domain is invoked, if the courts uphold it, there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. It doesn't matter if you've owned that property for 100 years. You can fight it to a degree, but it is a actual thing that, from the time this country was essentially founded, it is one of the things that has always been understood and accepted that we are a larger community in America and we do have to share. And what's best for the community as a whole is more important than what's best for one individual's rights. Now that doesn't always apply, but for most cases it does. And that is one way that he can do this. But the courts would have to uphold it and it would have to be legitimate. He would actually have to be, putting together a project that was going to benefit the community overall, which would mean he would have to improve the city, not make it worse, which for a communist is impossible because they don't know how to build anything. They only know how to just take and destroy. So he probably wouldn't win in the courts with that method. But there are some other ways that he could do this thing where he does take people's properties. And there's a couple things called receivership and foreclosures. And in this instance, typically the bank forecloses on you because you can't pay the mortgage. So they have the right to do that because it is their property. Technically, they hold the deed since they still own it and you own the debt on it. Once you pay the debt down, then you own it. The deed gets transferred. It's the same thing if you have a car and you're financing or leasing it or whatever. You don't hold the title when you pay it off and you pay that last bill and you own it outright, then you get the title transferred to you. Now it becomes yours. So technically, at any moment, the bank could just decide to take your car back too. But with foreclosure or receivership, it doesn't just apply to banks. It also applies to the government in some regards, where if you don't pay your bills on taxes or something, and it gets to a point where it's a significant amount of money, they could force the courts to approve the confiscation essentially of your property and put it into foreclosure because you owe all this money that you're not paying the government and they need that money and they know that they're probably never going to get it out of you because you're not selling the building anytime soon. So that is another way that he could do this where he says we charge all these code violation fines to people. They're not paying them because they're protesting. Now we're going to put their building into foreclosure and take it from them and use the courts to kick them out so that we could have the building, With eminent domain, they have to give you fair market value for your property in order to confiscate it from you. But then at the end of the day, it's really not confiscation because they're paying you for it. So it's just a trade essentially. They're paying you fair market value, whatever the most amount you're going to get on average at that time and that market is. You're going to get that. You're going to get to take that money and run and go somewhere else and reinvest it. With a foreclosure, they don't pay you anything. They just take your building from you.